I'm Rebecca Goldberg. I'm the Executive Director at the Helen Diller Institute for Jewish Law and Israel Studies here at UC Berkeley. You're joining us for the fifth and last talk in this year's Helen Diller Institute Literary Series, which has been hosted and curated by our very own Yael Segalovitz. The four previous recordings from this year's in the series are on our website at hdi.berkeley.edu, and we also have the year before as well. I think there were four in that in that program as well. So we have 9 in the literary series. It's pretty amazing. I would say diverse spectrum of voices talking about Hebrew literature from a variety of viewpoints. So please check that out. Today's talk is entitled Israeli Literary Journalism and Artistic Expression After October 7th, a conversation with Yuval Avivi and Dana Yoeli. You will be meeting them in just a moment. Literary scholar and journalist Yuval Avivi and artist Dana Yoeli will be joining Yael Segalovitz for a conversation about the challenges of literary and artistic expression and critique after October 7th. Avivi and Yoeli are going to be exploring their respective experiences as an Israeli literary journalist on the one hand and as an Israeli artist in the post-October 7th climate, including global reception, shifts in the publishing industry and art world, changes in literary and artistic content, writers and artists' responses, and audience expectations. A word about the Helen Diller Institute. We provide a rich academic forum for students and faculty through our 2 programs, one in Israel Studies and one on Jewish law, thought, and identity. The Institute houses an undergraduate fellowship of 30 to 40 students, brings visiting faculty from Israeli and US universities to teach and research at Berkeley, hosts the university's undergraduate minor in Israel Studies, and offers dozens of lectures and programs for the public and campus communities. And all of these programs, activities, and events of our institute are dependent on philanthropic support, so we thank you also for your continued support. So now I'm thrilled to welcome Yuval Avivi and Dana Yoeli and provide some brief bios, and you'll learn more along the way. Yuval Avivi is a literary journalist, editor, writer, and critic based in Tel Aviv. He edits and hosts the daily literary radio program Undercover on Kan Tarbut, the cultural channel of the Israeli Public Broadcasting Corporation. Avivi regularly lectures at cultural and literary events and at the National Library of Israel and other leading cultural institutions. His writing has appeared in Haaretz, Globes, Al Monitor, Mako, Time Out, Tel Aviv, Makor Rishon, among others, and he has served as an editor for Israel Hayom and Walla. He edited the short story collection Fight Fight. Avivi holds an MA in Literature from Tel Aviv University and is currently a Murray Galinson San Diego Israel Initiative visiting professor. That's quite the mouthful. MGSDII, I don't know how you've managed for the whole semester to say that, but I thought our acronyms were and names were tough. But he is teaching Hebrew literature in the Department of English and Comparative Literature at San Diego State University. And Dana Yoeli is a Tel Aviv-based multidisciplinary artist whose practice encompasses large-scale installations, video, ceramics, drawing, and sculpture. Her work explores the tension between personal narrative and collective ethos, examining the roles that nostalgia, memory, and commemorative ceremonies play in shaping these relationships. In recent years, Yoeli has shifted her focus from collective memory, comprising a cohesive ethos, to the fragmented specific stories found in personal, often overlooked images and untold narratives. Yoeli holds a BFA and MFA from Bezalel Academy of Arts in Jerusalem, and her work has been exhibited in leading galleries and museums throughout Israel and Europe, and she's the recipient of numerous grants, awards, and fellowships. Her works are held in private and public collections in Israel and internationally. And finally, I'm excited to welcome yet again Yael Segalovitz, our host and curator, who's going to be moderating. Professor Segalovitz is the Helen Diller Institute visiting professor in the Department of Comparative Literature and Jewish Studies at UC Berkeley, an assistant professor in the Department of Foreign Literatures and Linguistics at Ben-Gurion University of the Negev. She earned her PhD in comparative literature from UC Berkeley in 2018, where she was both a Townsend Center and Posen Fellow. At the Helen Diller Institute, she has been teaching courses on Hebrew literature and translation, and she's also been curating and facilitating this literary series featuring leading Israeli writers and journalists such as Yael Segalovitz, Sarai Shavit, Ayelet Gunder Goshen, Maya Arad, and Shimon Adaf, to name just a few. And today's program is part of that wonderful series. Her research spans American, Hebrew, and Brazilian modernisms with a focus on transnational literary exchanges and translations. Her recent book, How Close Reading Made Us, The Transnational Legacies of New Criticism, traces the global circulation of close reading beyond the Anglophone world and its influence on modernist literary production in Hebrew and Portuguese. Her current projects explore the resurgence of psychoanalytic object relations theory in the American humanities and the representation of sleep and psychic rest in Hebrew literature. And she also co-hosts the podcast Psychoanalyterature, featuring conversations with leading scholars at the intersection of psychoanalysis and literature. So please welcome everyone and join me in welcoming our speakers, and I will leave it to them.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be in this forum again. Thank you all for coming. I'm excited and touched to have Yuval and Dana with us today. And I, as always, fear that I have more questions than the time would allow us. But I'll make sure to have enough time also for Q&A so that you guys could present your questions to our wonderful speakers. But let me dive right in. And before I touch kind of specifically on your works, your individual works and engagements, since we have Yuval and Dana who are so central to different cultural realms in Israeli society, I want, if you're willing, to give us kind of a snapshot of what you feel is happening in Israel at the moment in the realm of literature and in the realm of plastic art. I know it's an impossible question, but maybe just kind of throw something out there and then we can take the conversation from there.
Thank you so much for having us, Yael. Thank you all for coming. Rebecca, thank you so much. I really appreciate your invitation to be here. We really appreciate it. And thank you for your Helen Diller Institute. So I'll be talking mostly about literature and not about art. And
literature is also art.
I think the Israeli literature is in a tough spot. It's been in a tough spot for quite some time before the war and before the international reaction to the war, because the readership in Israel, unfortunately, is I don't want to be too dramatic, but it's diminishing, you say, right? It's disappearing. We have fewer and fewer readers, and it's not connected to the political situation or the security situation. It's been like this for many years, and so less and less books that were written by Hebrew writers are sold in Israel, which is devastating for the industry. And writers find it more and more difficult to be able to make a living out of writing, and it's now came to a point where you actually have to pay. Most of the books that are published in Israel, the writer is actually paying the publication in order for it to be published. Sorry? Oh, really? I thought it was better here. Unfortunately, I guess it's a difficult profession everywhere in the world, but because there's not so many readers in Hebrew, it's a tiny market. So I think the situation is a little bit more risky than the English writing scene. But this has been going on for years. What happened in the past 3 years, unfortunately, is that the authors in Israel found themselves in an impossible situation where our government cuts funds and cancels all kinds of prizes that are essential for the existence of writing in a place where readership is so small. And on the other hand, grants and translations to other languages are also disappearing because nobody wants to translate Hebrew literature to other languages because of the reputation Israel has in the global art and literature community. And so every route to make a profit out of writing has been blocked. And so they found themselves really in an impossible situation where they don't have anywhere in the world to go to, and they don't have really anywhere to go to in Israel. And I'm concerned very much that writing is becoming a hobby for the privileged, right? If you don't need the income, that's the only possibility to write. And that obviously makes the voices that we hear in Israeli literature very specific. And that's always a problem. You'll find the most powerful people in Israel being able to write, and other voices are shut down, right? And even more worrying for me is that we feel in the literary scene of Israel is that we're the only one concerned. When you try to talk to the establishment about it, when you try to talk to the Minister of Education or Minister of Culture, it seems like they don't care at all. And it's a battle that's very, very difficult to win if you don't have some force behind you, to get some help from the establishment. So I'm sorry, I'm so dramatic and sad. I was planning to be funny and light. But unfortunately, the situation is not that bright. Having said all that, wonderful things, wonderful pieces of art, wonderful writing is being published in Israel. And we know that even in the darkest hours of the darkest regimes, in a very poor circumstances, great works of art were created. So it still is the case in Israel. You have wonderful literature in Israel. So, like Jeff Goldblum says in Jurassic Park, nature's always wins. So literature always wins, eventually.
So that ended up kind of hopeful, which is, like in addition to the bios, I have to say that we're also married. So, and we have 2 kids who are parked somewhere down the hall.
For you to share.
Yeah, so that's for me to share. That's just, the situation. So usually I get to be the positive one, but I am hoping. So generally, I think in art, a couple of things happen. Yuval is speaking from a perspective of a professional, like a critic. I'm an artist, and I think what we see now in art is a couple of things. First of all, the institutions, the government, like all the supports are being cut, and what is being distributed is just being distributed in a very kind of ideological way. We're heading towards this. You feel the same, right? Like, argue with me. But this is how we feel, and we've been on the fence. I know myself and other artists have been always like in the past 3 years, we've been kind of on the fence whether we should apply for government support, because it's something that we don't necessarily relate to. Obviously, it's our tax money, but it's always this conflict. In addition, a lot of cancellations. Like in Israel, internally, I had 2 one-woman shows that were I had dates for them and they were canceled because the spaces were shutting down, non-profit in Israel during the 3 years. I also had some cancellations abroad. So this is kind of how I see the situation from my point of view. On the other hand side, I think that some amazing things are happening in Israeli art, because if you're not looking outward and you're not seeking like love, you have a great opportunity of doing something that really matters. And you also have the kind of שפה משותפת, like a joint ethos, a joint language, a meta language that a lot of Israelis and Jews kind of speak in threads that we don't necessarily mark, or that are not necessarily linguistic or specific or very clear. And I think works of art are now turning to this kind of I don't know, like a trajectory to work from, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, Dana, I want to push on that a little bit through your own work. We're entering in Israel into Memorial Day today, and your work really engages so deeply with the Israeli rituals of death commemoration, the fragility of the ethos of strength and resilience. And it seems like the presence of death becomes more and more felt in the Israeli sphere. And I was wondering what this did to your work, or what generally you feel about commemorations, this ethos, wherever this question takes you. Maybe you can show us something that you've worked on.
Yeah, I can have, I put together a very short slideshow of works, including like the last works I made before October 7th, already into this government. I'm guessing that probably most of you know like where Israel is internally at the moment. Yeah, commemoration has been like a material for me. Ceremonies, bereavement, but I think that we are all like walking in grief for the past 3 years with like sinuses of that, as far as death can be dynamic, but yeah. So this was the last show that I had before the war. It's a really special one, and I was, I'm even excited when I look at it now. This was, you can hear, this was a show that I made with my grandmother, who was a sculptor and an amazing person. She was one of the most important people in my life, and still is, only she died like a couple of years before that. She was a really great ceramicist and a very amazing artist, and I was invited to do a show with her in Bet Binyamin, which is a ceramic kind of center. And I took her work and installed it in a way that she would never agree to, which is, this is like the fun part. I was telling, yeah, exactly. So you have to look at the bright side. I told my curator, who's a very impressive curator, Avi Lubin, we worked together on this, and I said, listen, if you don't like the installation, don't die next time. Like, it's your problem. So I kind of, this was the work. It was kind of like a ceremonial like area, and I worked in white ceramic and white clay, and this was kind of probably the last time I worked in white for that year. Let's see if it works. Yeah, this was one of the works. This was a fountain of steam. It was like a supersonic. It was like a steam fountain that was part of the show, and it was a show that really dealt a lot with intimacy and sensuality and touch, I guess. And this was the first thing that I did in December 2023. So, yeah, cut to that. October 7th was, I don't have to, like, it's really idiotic to say it was horrible. was an understatement. We know people. We had some people in our family that were in Berkeley that day. Some didn't make it. And we were very involved from the beginning with everything that was happening in Israel. So like all the civil kind of, we were in that. And for me, it was really easy because it was impossible to go into the studio. Like there was no, on the one hand side, what is there to do in art? Because art is like a sublimation of everything that's too painful to deal with. And suddenly this was empty in a sense. Like this tool was impractical. And also, like, who needs art, right? I'm never going to do art again, ever again. So it's been 2 months of just, helping in any possible way. And then after 2 months, I said, okay, this is, Dana, this is not going to work. Yeah, באמת, go to the studio. And then the first thing I did, I was doing some drawing and some very like classic, training. And then I looked to the corner and there was a 12-kilo package of black clay, which is something that I never ever use because it doesn't make sense to use black clay. So this was the first thing that I did. I decided to change the syntax in a sense. And this is the work. It's a very small work. The glaze refers to, do you remember? But this is artists are really very perverse people, okay? And I'm going to expose something really embarrassing. But during the Gulf War, there were the cormorants drowning. And as a child, I remember the guilt feeling that I was so, I was appalled by this, but also just I couldn't stop looking. So this was the glaze, right? This is the book that I published during these 2 years. I'm only showing works from these 2 years. And this book was also about my grandmother, or kind of dealing with a secret that she had. And it was, in the beginning I thought about making a very vast catalog for her works. But then after October 7th, it became clear, jump in, Gum, Ken. It became very clear that it doesn't make any sense to do that. It doesn't make any sense to go for huge commemorations and this big of her things, and that I'm going to make my own work for her.
Yeah, no, I'll definitely want to come back also to the question of the materiality of books and your interest in the book as an artistic object. But I want to jump for a minute to Yuval, and I think it is really interesting the move from the practitioner to the critic. I mean, we've had many writers here, and we've had Ron, who is a scholar, but it's also really interesting to think about the public literary critic and your position within the field. And I was wondering what you think, again, after you both discussed the position, the impossible position of Hebrew literature and Hebrew art at the minute, about possible kind of solutions or ways out that we see the field taking. One of them, for example, is shifting the conversation from Israeli literature to Hebrew literature in diaspora, as we see, for example, with Dori Manor's publication, Altneuland, that is really trying to kind of shift the cultural centrality of Israel into thinking about Hebrew literature as something that has many different centers. So I was wondering what you think about this as a critic. Do you feel like it's a way out? Do you feel like it has its own perils, or that we don't know yet where it's going? What are your thoughts about this?
So again, the discussion about whether or not Hebrew writing, Hebrew literature can exist outside of Israel is something that began before October 7th, before the current regime in Israel. And in many ways, what happened in the past 3 years, sorry for a second, it's accelerated an ongoing trend that was happening even before that. And I remember that it's something that's been talked about for like 10 or 20 years. In 2011, there was the protest against the cost of living in Israel, right? And there was a huge group of people who moved to Berlin, to Germany. From Israel, a lot of them are young artists, young writers, young researchers, right? And even then they said, yes, we can form a community and creative community in Hebrew, in Berlin, with everything that it signifies, obviously. And it's possible, and I remember that we started talking about it back then, but it became such a huge thing the last couple of years, since unfortunately a lot of people are moving out of Israel, and a lot of them are scholars and artists and writers who can't find themselves living in Israel, both because of the security issues and both because they feel they can't continue living under the current regime in Israel. So it's been accelerated, right? And they have a valid argument that the creation of the Hebrew word lasted for 2,000 years without having the state of Israel as the center of Israeli and Hebrew creation, right? Not Israeli, obviously. And it's a valid point, but I don't think that it's sufficient today. You mentioned Dori Mano, and they are doing, I think, wonderful things. They have the possibility to publish wonderful books, both in Hebrew and in other languages, and they're having a base in Berlin, having this publishing house abroad probably makes the connection with audience outside of Israel easier, right? And that's something, like I said before, that authors in Israel are craving, right? It's essential for their, even, I would say, survival. But essentially, they're writing for Hebrew reading audience. And Hebrew reading audience is in Israel nowadays. And I don't believe that if the state of Israel ceases to exist, and you'll have many centers, many communities of Hebrew-speaking communities around the world, I don't think it will last more than 2 or 3 generations before it will be lost again. And the argument that the creation in Hebrew lasted 2,000 years without the state of Israel is, I'm having trouble agreeing with it completely, because it wasn't a creative writing in the way that I think it should be. You want a community, a live community in the same place, vibrant community that has criticism and that they have dialogue and discourse. And I don't think that it can happen when you're scattered all over the world. It did happen, but it was not grand enough, not big enough, not alive enough for it to be what's been happening in the past 78 years in the state of Israel. And I think that the argument that the Hebrew literature can survive without the state of Israel nowadays is not true. But I do wish that the state of Israel will continue to exist. That's a key, I'm heavily invested in that idea. But if we count on the continuation of the existence of Israel, I think that it's great that we have communities speaking Hebrew, Hebrew-speaking communities around the world doing something else, trying another route. They can say, I don't care if they say that they are completely independent. I don't think they are completely independent. I think they are really dependent on the readership in Israel. But if they want to say that they're independent, that's fine. Continue doing what you're doing, publish good books, create new connections with publishers that are still willing to discuss Hebrew literature and Jewish literature, and they to translate it and to have Israelis visit, which is something that we have less and less these days, do it, and we will continue to do what we do in the State of Israel, and the two are not, the idea that we're fighting each other is absurd. And right now it's like a fight, right? It's like an argument. You know, they say that if you have a place where you have two Jews, you have three synagogues, right? Mm-hmm. So we have this urge to fight. We have this urge to say, we are the center of the creation. We are the center of where Hebrew literature is being created. And it's not fruitful. Right now, there is a State of Israel. There are growing communities outside of Israel that create in Hebrew, and the whole argument has become, the whole discourse has become so divisive, which is crazy, as if we don't have enough fighting.
And I should say that Yuval really interviews on a daily basis. So it's really interesting that you are now an interviewee in this context. But I was wondering if this tension comes up in your celebrated radio show, the idea that writers have to locate themselves within this argument. Are you on the side of Israeli Hebrew literature, or are you on the side of Hebrew literature that tries to disconnect its affinity to the State of Israel? Do you feel it? Is it palpable? Is it something that people express?
Well, first of all, when Dori Manor founded this publishing house, they I'm not sure if it's true, but they said it's the first time since the Israeli state exists that you have Hebrew publishing house outside of Israel. Mm-hmm. So that was, I'm not sure that it's true. I think it's not completely true, but I don't want to argue with Dori Manor about that. We have a lot to argue without it. And so we interviewed him, obviously, because it's an amazing thing. It's amazing. We consider everything that happens in the Israeli and the Hebrew literature scene our business, right? So it was a major thing, and we talked to him, and then people were really mad at us that we allowed him to say the things that he said. And he's a very provocative speaker, and he says, we don't need the State of Israel, we don't want to be in touch with Israel, we don't get funds from Israel, which are all, it's okay for me, it's okay to feel that way, it's okay to act that way. And people were furious. And then I think the first book that they published was Leah Aini's, which is a celebrated writer, a wonderful writer from Israel, and she lives in Israel. And she got heavily criticized for publishing a book at his publishing house, which is crazy. Why do you care? And people really were mad at her, were mad at Dori Manor, were mad at the journalists that are covering it, as if, and you have nowadays in journalism in Israel a lot of coverage of Israelis that are moving abroad, mm-hmm. And building a community. Just a few days ago, I saw in Ynet, one of the leading news sites in Israel, there was an article about this group of Israelis that form a community. I think it's in Italy. Mm-hmm. And they maintain an Israeli lifestyle and very different than what's surrounding them. And you can see the comment section. Everybody's like, why are you encouraging it? Why are you encouraging people leaving Israel and this is destroying Israel? People actually feel that if something Israeli, if something Hebrew happens outside of Israel, it's like trying to destroy Israel from within, which you're staying, so do this in Israel, right? So that's what I'm trying to do. We're trying to create art in Israel because we're staying there. But really, people feel like if you're an Israeli and you're moving out of the country and you're trying to continue to do your things in your mother tongue. I don't know how someone who was born and raised in Israel can do that. It's not very easy to shift, right? Nabokov did it, but he's the only one we remember, right? So why do people are really angry about it, as if anyone who's trying to create something Israeli, something Hebrew, outside of Israel is harming the state of Israel, and it's so evident in everything that we do.
Dana, I wonder, Yuval speaks a lot about rage and anger, how these emotion affects come into work in your, selection of materials, in what you do with them. Do you feel that rage, or is it a different set of emotions that are at play when you work now?
I
feel rage.
Yeah, rage is not rage is not unfamiliar to me as a person. As an artist, I try to kind of, be more mature about it, and then realize that a lot of times behind rage there is grief or pain. And rage, if you're a child, we all understand that a tantrum usually covers up for huge discomfort, right? So my rage as well. And when I choose materials, that's a really interesting question, actually, because I think my rage is melted in the entrance to the studio, and it becomes something much more vulnerable, like pain, fear even. And then my choice of materials will always be something that's creating some kind of a tension. Not attention, tension. So I would work with stone, or I would use porcelain to make very soft-looking things. But porcelain is, of course, super pointy and sharp and fragile. And so I will look for things that are working in this kind of contradiction, because I feel this tension really creates more attention from viewers, or from, it can stop you on your tracks.
I feel that tension. I mean, the image just...
I don't know the password.
It's okay, because it's part of the tension, right?
I don't care.
But I should state that this,
no worries.
you see in the slide both the tension of material between the stone and the fragility of the page, but also, for people who do not know Hebrew, the title itself speaks to the empty place,
Right.
The horror vacui.
Horror vacui.
Yeah, I will pronounce it in Portuguese, of course, but
The
you'll do the Latin better.
Yeah.
But again, I feel like it speaks to a lot of what we're talking about, the fact that we have to name the missing thing.
For sure.
So if you can talk about the various tensions that we see here.
Yeah, so this book is something that I published during this time, and usually when you publish an artist book, it's 500 copies, but here I wanted to, very few. I wanted to make 50 and was convinced into 70. Yeah, really, I was really forced by my designer, but she's very strong-minded, so I still want to work with her, so I just do what she says. An amazing designer, Noah Schwartz, if you know her work. And this book, I just knew before I made it that I didn't know it was going to be in it. I knew it was going to be in a stone. So I knew that I was going to hide it in something that is kind of, I was thinking of two things. One is, of course, the Wailing Wall, a place where you put your secrets and hopes, like a prayer. And the other is Indiana Jones, which is also a very probably a stronger reference in my life. I love this kind of enigma or riddle where if you put the right thing, the door will spin. Like if you do the right thing, if it fits, if the two materials that are not connected or came from two very, very, very far places of the world, can they join together, something big will happen, right? Something will activate. It will activate something. So this was it. So I made a book to bury in a stone. I carved the stones with a mason, like we worked together and I chose the stones. He will never ever work with me again. This is the super final. This was my only work with him, which is a shame. He does not like me anymore, but I love the stones. And so I made an edition of 10, put in stone, each were different. And the book itself was, I think I have a, yeah. The book itself was almost without text. It was my grandmother's work on the right side and life, and my work on the left-hand side. It's a wet sculpture. My sculpture is a sculpture that I put a fountain into. I wired a fountain into it, and it was just collapsing because it's unfired, so it was turning back into mud. And this is like a flip book. You know, you can flip it back and forth. If you flip it like from right to left, apropos Hebrew literature, it will dissolve, but if you flip it from left to right, it will build. And on the right-hand side, I put some things that I found in my grandmother's studio that I never knew of, which is works from her academy, photos of her sitting in the sun with her eyes closed, like very enigmatic things. I want to go to the other slide, but I don't know what there is. Yeah, so we're coming to an end, almost. This work, this was my last show. It was in September, kind of like before we were getting organized to move. And this work, like the series was made during like the last year, which was horrible. In Israel, it was really, really difficult. I was very involved with the hostage crisis and the families, and I was very much like in demonstrations pretty much 5 times a week during all this time. And every day, like every morning or every evening, when I took out the dog, I would like snap a photo of the sky, and you had to go so far to just get a clean, you know, no building and nothing ugly or no, you know, helicopter bringing someone. And so I used these snapshots to create a series of sky paintings. And when finishing each painting, I would put a like this signature of a moon for like relating to the moon phase of the day that I finished it. So it was kind of like a diary. And this show, maybe I have a, yeah. This is very small oil on canvas works. And the show, which was in Shlush Gallery, if anybody knows it, which is a really nice space in Yafo. When it opened, we still had a lot of hostages. And when it closed, during the time, we didn't have one hostage, one living hostage in Gaza. So this was like this is my optimistic finishing, right? Because this show really saw the other days, in a sense. Yeah, but we're still here, so.
Yeah, I wonder about the here. Because you guys now are in the US, and Dana, I know you're away from your studio, and Yuval, you're away from your radio show, but you're also teaching here. So if you can talk a little bit about what it does for you to be here. How do you feel about being in America, the myth of America for, you know, for us Israelis? I know that you, Dana, were born in the US, so maybe you have a different kind of associations. Just what does the here feels like?
It feels so far away from home. It does, I think, because I spent some time in I studied in Germany, and I did some residencies in Germany, and it was very difficult. Like the language barrier and the cultural barrier was really something to go through. And the minute you came here, everything is so easy, you know? Like everything is so easy. Even like the most horrible bureaucracy pieces are just so manageable, and it makes very immediate way to feeling like so far away from home. Yeah.
Is it a far away that is helpful, generative? Do you know what I mean? Is it a far away that is provocative, that you feel like working with it artistically? Or is it a far away that feels like a detachment.
This is my tantrum moment, right?
Go for it.
No, so I kind of reject, in a very childish way, the idea of growing from boredom because I'm far away from my studio, which is not good for me. This is who I am. Like, I work. I just, I work, I paint, I sculpt, I cook. Everything is mixed together. I have kids. Like, I'm always late. I'm always wandering around. Like, this is the person that I am. And to lack this major outlet for interest and emotion doesn't make me happy. But I have to say that, first of all, I've been like touring the US. I saw some things that I really wanted to see since I was a teenager. One of them is Georgia O'Keeffe's home, which was very, very moving for me. And yeah, I'm just, trying to put something in to get it out later. But yeah, I'm not very mature about it.
What do you think?
For me, it's very interesting personally, because this is getting personal, but I'm gonna be.
It's always personal.
It's personal here. Yeah, it's personal here. So I'm gonna reveal some secrets from our from our marriage, I guess. We've been together since we were 18. We're high school sweethearts, and we're in Israel because of Dana. If it was up to me, we would have left a long time ago. Maybe we would have returned by now. I don't know. But when we were in our early 20s, I told Dana that we should move out of the country. And I told her, I'm not sure that I want to live anywhere else, but I do want to choose. And if I'm staying in Israel the whole time, I'm not really choosing. And I was excited about this opportunity. This was actually the first time when we were like out. We were in Germany for a couple of months, but it felt different. I don't know why. This was the first time for me to actually leave Israel and be somewhere else. And it's a very interesting experience because you always think you know what's going to happen, but it rarely is, right? What you expected. I thought it would be a completely different experience. I'm not sure about how I feel because I'm still in the process of understanding whether or not at this point I want to live in Israel, I want to go back, or I want to stay here, or I want to go to Europe, or whatever. And it's so funny because I teach, one of the courses that I teach at SDSU is stories of immigration, traveling, and relocation in Hebrew literature, most of them in the past 20, 25 years, so fairly new literature. And the conclusion that we reach to in each novel that we read, and we read quite a few, is how Israelis adopted the idea of the wandering Jew, which is a terrible, terrible, if you know the story of the wandering Jew, you know what it is. It's a terrible story that was told, if anyone doesn't know, it's a terrible story that was told about a Jew that saw Christ, Jesus Christ, on the way to his crucifixion and didn't help him. Although Christ asked for some water, there are different variations of the story, and he didn't help, and his punishment was to never die and to always seek home, to always be wandering. And this is obviously an anti-Semitic tale. It's terrible. And we reclaimed it, right? There is a plant called the Wandering Jew, and we love it. It's all over Israel. And we consider ourselves, so I think a lot of people that are using the term Wandering Jew in Israel don't even know where it came from. They don't know it's a negative story that we consider it like advantage, like an advantage. We're always on the go. And what we're talking about this idea in current Hebrew literature, and we come each and every time to the same conclusion, that in many books that were written about immigration and relocation and traveling in Israel, the writers are trying to find other solutions outside of Israel. If it's Eshkol Nevo in Neuland, they're trying to build a new Israel in South America. If it's relocation by Ayelet Gundu-Goshen, it's not relocation, it's called relocation in Hebrew, it's called the wolf hunt in English. They're trying, it's like, it's a family in Silicon Valley and they have this perfect life, but it's not so perfect. They have a murder there, so it goes downhill. And so each and every time that we find a new home, that we create a new home, that we seek a new adventure somewhere else, we don't reach home. We stay restless. And almost all the novels that we read are like this. We are not happy with Israel. We are not happy with something that's going on. Okay, we will build something new somewhere else, and then we reach there, and we're still not happy, and we're going to somewhere else. And I feel like I myself am that kind of a novel. I wanted so much to have this experience of living outside of Israel, and now that I have it, I'm saying, it's not really what I imagined, maybe something else. And I think that there's something wandering in both senses, wandering like and traveling in our existence, in our Israeli existence, in the Jewish existence. And it's been so easy the last couple of years as left-wing liberal Israelis to say, the hell with it. I'm not fighting for this anymore. I can't. I don't have the resources anymore. I'm tired of fighting for this country. I'm tired of how people outside of Israel are calling me or how they treat me. I don't want this anymore. But I guess that's what I came to understand here is that immigration is not that easy. I should have known. And even if it was easy, maybe I'm much more Israeli than I thought I am.
Can you say maybe one last question for each of you before we open it up for conversation? A little bit more about your experience in the classroom, your pedagogical experience here. What does it feel like to teach Hebrew literature at the moment? What are the students' reactions? What are their interests?
So before I came here, obviously a lot of people warned me that I'm going to get canceled and that I will have demonstration next to my classroom and it will be difficult. And when people saw my syllabus, which is very political, because literature is a political idea, it's a political thing, and I'm not running away from it, and I'm not running away from being Israeli, and none of it happened. I had zero encounters with, I'm actually quite...
I promised Yuval that if he wants a demonstration, we can arrange it for him.
They say that SDSU is very calm regarding the Israeli topic, and I heard that Berkeley is not quite as calm. It is? Okay. So I thought maybe I come here and I finally see it. No, really, the experience from that aspect was nothing but complete opposite of what I was warned about. I think that my students, more than anything, I asked them, the first thing that I did in the classroom, I said, why are you coming to a class about Hebrew literature with an Israeli professor in this climate? Why are you here? And they said, right? You're all in the...
It fits the schedule.
It fits the schedule. We needed...
I know my students.
Like, do you know Hebrew literature? No. Have you heard? They didn't... I have the other class that I teach is short stories and podcasting. We read a short story each week. We interview by Zoom the writer, and then we try to create a podcast. Each of the students try to create a podcast based on one of the stories and the interviews that we conducted. And I told them, wow, I'm bringing you the elite. You'll be amazed. And for someone who knows Hebrew literature, Edgar Keret and Dror Mishani and Ayelet Gunder Goshen and really the top writers of Israel. And they're like, who's Edgar Keret? And I'm like, you don't know Edgar Keret? Then who do you know out of the living Israeli writers? Do you know Amos Oz? Do you know Shai Agnon? Nothing. And then I started talking about October 7th because some of the literature is connected to the experience and everything that I read right now. It's like all of the previous analysis is gone, and now it's only through the lens of through the glasses of the October 7th. You reinterpret everything that you read. So I was, and then they didn't really know what October 7th was, and they didn't know. And when we talked about the conflict, they vaguely knew what the conflict was about. So at first I was amazed.
Now?
Sorry?
Do they know something now?
Yeah, that was the thing. I had to dedicate some of my class to history and sociology of the conflict between Palestinians and Israelis, which are topics that I'm not an expert of. So it was very difficult, and I tried to. I'm afraid of this word, but I tried to educate them about it. But they were the upside was they were really open and curious, and they wanted to know, and they wanted to understand the origins of the conflict. And then at one point the war with Iran began. I came to class, it started on a Saturday, and my first class afterwards was Tuesday. So we had 3 good days of war, which the US was involved, right? And I said it was a horrible weekend for me. I'm very stressed. I'm sorry if I'm not my usual self. My mother, who's 75 years old, has been running to the shelter 20, 30 times the last couple of days. And they said, why? And they weren't even, some of them weren't even aware to the fact that the US is conducting a war that minute. You have US jet fighters in Iran while I was speaking to them, right? So it was very surprising, but on the other hand, it was an opportunity because it's a blank page and you can talk about anything. They were really open, they were really curious, and I had to tell them, listen, I'm biased, I'm Israeli, and this is your first time to hear about the conflict. Don't be satisfied with that. Go and hear Palestinian speakers too, and read Palestinian literature. Don't be because at times I thought they were too convinced with my perspective, and I was afraid that I'm doing this propaganda course, so which is far from what I want to do. So the experience in the classrooms was very surprising at first, but then very much encouraging because really they were so curious, they wanted to know, they were excited about hearing Israeli writers speak about the work and about the current situation in Israel. And it's the complete opposite of what Israelis always hear the experience is going to be. You're going to come to an American campus, they're going to boycott you, they're going to cancel you, they're going to protest. No, it's completely, for my own personal experience, the complete opposite.
Thank you. Dana, one last question for you again before we open it up. Your work is so extremely beautiful. And I wonder, what is your position regarding beauty at the moment? I mean, is there a place for the beautiful what do we do with it? Do you have any conflicting relationship with this concept and, you know, this adjective?
So, good question again. I really asked no difficult questions. So I was expecting no. באמת. Beauty is also like a tool. So it's in the toolbox. We're really fortunate. We have a history of thousands of years of like the history of art. And we can, as artists, I mean, we can relate to. We can use it. We can use the visuals. So sometimes I imagine like a porcelain piece to be like I stole something from Versailles. Like, you know, I tore something from the ceiling in Versailles, and then I don't know, something flew in from space and melted into it, and that's it. Like, that's the piece. So this is the reference. And you can have a lot of cultural things. Sorry about that. You can have a lot of cultural things that kind of merge together, and then beauty is one of them, right? But I also have a relationship. It kind of humors me. I think it's funny to make things that are very kitsch or very exaggerated, and I'm sometimes pushing like the boundaries of beauty to kind of pass through to the other side of overdoing something, making something too, I don't know, flowery or beautiful or delicate, in a world where nothing is delicate and beautiful, but everything is, of course, beautiful and worth living for. Like, this tension comes with beauty. Like, when you have very controlled beauty or the question of beauty, you always risk being a fascist, right? It's a very kind of fascist organization of spaces, of paintings, of architecture, of sculptures. And if you can touch on that and then work through and keep pushing, I think it's a really interesting question about what is the role of beauty in a world that is so horrible. And also, one more thing, like I really like to work with materials that are the most far, like nothing is more far from Israel than porcelain, right? It's delicate, it's clean, it's fragile, like it will never survive. Yeah, it's cold. It will never like survive in Israel. There's no place for that. Israel is like a rough concrete that was like poured in a bad way. Like, this is it. And this tension is really interesting to me. What happens to something when you pluck it from its origin? Like, you take the porcelain, which is a very specific story. It came from the east, from China. It came to England and Germany and then France. And what happens when it comes to Tel Aviv? I think it's a really interesting kind of passage of a material, and what also happens to an organism like a person who was plucked from their origin and brought to this, yeah.
Okay, I have many more questions. So if you don't have any, I have many to ask, but let's move it to the audience for a little bit.
Is it on? Yeah. For Yuval, about teaching American students. Did you get any of them to become I mean, there's so much great Hebrew literature translated into English. Did you get any of them to become interested in sort of the extracurricular reading?
Well, that's a great question. I'll ask them on Thursday.
I'm trying always to encourage them to read more books of the writers that we read, but I haven't talked to them about like literature that were written before the 2000s, and I think that I'm not sure if they will continue reading Hebrew literature afterwards. It's like they said that it fits their curriculum. It fits they have a slot open. I'm not sure how much they continue to engage in Hebrew literature to tell you the truth. What I'm trying to do right now is to encourage them to interview the writers by themselves. And I think that once they have a personal connection to the writers, it might work. And I think that some of the stories and the novels that we read are like a gateway to Hebrew literature. So I'm hoping yes, but I must admit that I'm not sure. And you know, they're students. They're very young. When I was studying, when I was in my MA studies, I remember that I don't remember who was the professor, but we read this. I had this course about Italian literature, and I was so fascinated. And I said, I'm going to study Italian. This is great. And that was it for me. We finished the course, and I still love the literature that we read, and I love the authors that we read, and the professor spoke Italian, so he read us Italian paragraphs. He read us paragraphs from the Italian book, so it was wonderful. It's a beautiful language. But that's it. I know if there's a great Italian book, I'll read it. It's not like I'm invested in it anymore. They're students. They're easy to get excited, but then they'll go to the next course and they'll be excited about another thing. Something will stay, I hope.
Thanks to all three of you. I wanted to ask about the use of the Hebrew language outside of Israel that you mentioned, and also talked about the emotional reaction, because in many ways it kind of echoes the debate about Yildim in general, but the discussion from the 80s or 90s, which calmed down, so that the discussion about Israelis leaving Israel. So there is, I think, not only, so there people just get used to it also in many ways, of Israelis living outside of Israel. It was also very emotional. Here, I would think, and I would want you to speak more about that, it's not only that we are not used to that, but there is a difference, a crucial difference in the creation of Hebrew work, which is national, which might even be religious. So if you could speak to that a bit more, that would be great.
You're asking about the writing in Hebrew outside of Israel from from not political, but how it happens philosophically or something like this?
About this discussion, because again, it resembles a different discussion that stopped in a way, ceased to be so emotional because there are so many Israeli experts. This is a newer discussion, as you also pointed out, but is it only that it's newer and so there is a strong emotional reaction, or that it's different b'mahut?
I think it's different. First of all, from the Israeli perspective, something weird has happened, that the most dangerous place for Jews is Israel, by numbers, right? Because something horrible happened, and Israelis, I think, at least some of them felt that it might be the end. And now we consider it like a lot, not we, I'm sorry, not we, some Israelis consider it as a second Shoah, right? As a second Holocaust, what happened on October 7th. And what they're saying right now to the people who choose to leave Israel and go somewhere else is just wait, right? Wait until anti-Semitism raise its head. There will be another Shoah in Europe, there will be another Shoah in Berlin. Let's see how you talk in 20 years. Or they say, they use the Islamization of Europe. They're saying it's going to be Islamic, and then they will have their Shoah, they will kill the Jews also. So there's this weird process where Israel is where the second Shoah happened, but they're warning the people who go abroad that it's going to happen again there.
And there's also a discourse of betrayal, right?
Yeah. So again, it's something like if you go abroad, it's like someone, they're insulted, right? You're going abroad, you're leaving us alone, you're destroying our future, you're destroying our hopes. If you go, we will not survive here, and it's not sustainable over there. So it's rage and insult and the feeling of betrayal. And I think that the creation in Hebrew, like I said, is based on instability, is always shaking. It's always thinking that it's not secure. When we were living in Germany, the most amazing thing was, and you feel it here too, San Diego is such a secure place. It's so chill. I mean, really, it's so relaxed. It will exist forever. And never had this feeling about Israel. I don't think that a lot of Israelis feel that it will last forever. No. All we talked about is when will the third house collapse. And so the notion of stability is foreign in a way to the Israeli and the Hebrew creation. And I think that what the people who are going abroad and trying to write in Hebrew outside of Israel are trying to say is, it will last forever. We have the ability to write in a language that will last forever, even if the state of Israel does not exist. And that's a completely different set of ideas, set of mind. And it's very different. You know, we interviewed Ruby Namdar, you know him? Mm-hmm. He's an excellent writer, and he writes in Hebrew. And his last book was very American and not Jewish, but the previous one was very Jewish, and the next one is very Jewish, so he told us. And I asked him, when we interviewed him in class, about this argument about the creation in Hebrew with outside of Israel, inside of Israel. And he said, I'm writing inside of Israel. I'm still writing Hebrew in Israel. I'm not fooling myself. I'm doing it in New York City, but it's in Israel. And I think that the people who are writing now, and he moved to the US 30 years ago, and the people who are moving out of Israel, who are immigrating out of Israel right now, they don't talk like this. They talk in a different language. And I think that it's a very different starting point, and your creation will be different. It's very interesting to see what it will be like in a couple of generations. Is it sustainable? How, if the children of the people who are immigrating right now to Greece still write in Hebrew, what will they write about? Will they feel like their community in, I don't know, in the Peloponnese is sustainable for the next 300 generations? It's very interesting to see if this idea of wandering Jew remains such a core idea in our creation.
I know we have a question here. I wanted to piggyback a little bit on Viola's question. You're focused on the writers, and I think I was hearing maybe a little bit more, maybe I'm adding to your question rather than, but the sort of that anger toward Yordim, those who are leaving, I wonder if that, because it does sort of echo an earlier literature and earlier scholarship that was super critical of those who were leaving, not necessarily just writers who thought they were going to create literature abroad, but more broadly that there were diaspora communities of expat Israelis. And if that sentiment is returning, is it because it's a time of war? Is it out of fear? Is it out of sort of anxiety? Is that a newer, stronger sentiment that we're hearing right now? And I think that was a little piece of the question too.
So I'm not an expert, but I feel it's the same story in different words a little bit. I think that Israelis, unfortunately, are very nationalistic, very proud. And it's there was a moment where moving out of Israel, where immigrating was a little bit less insulting for the people who stayed. I think a lot of it was economical in the early 2000s and after the protests of the cost of living in Israel. But now it's become Israel is very nationalistic right now, to say the least. And the idea that someone would not want to fight for this country is astonishing to some people. and infuriating. So I think we're back at the Yordim in a different version, because, and I think that the idea is that we can't survive if too many. There's the argument of demography, like if there's not enough Jews, we'll have an Arab prime minister. It's like, and that will be the end, right? Some Israelis believe that, and really, what the people feel is that if too many will leave, it will be destruction of Israel. So, and I think that's what people felt at the 80s, and there was like, it calmed down a little bit, and yes, it is connected to the war because we feel like it might end. We have so many threats from the outside that if there's not enough of us in Israel, it will collapse. So it's being insulted and being furious about the people who are doing it, but it's not different than what was in the 80s. It's just a new version of it, I think.
Can I add something? I think there's another layer of the question of liberal Israelis, which is different from now. Maybe we're growing into three groups of people. We have diaspora Jews, we have Israelis, mostly Israeli Jews, and we're going to have like groups of Israelis in diaspora, which is like a new thing that's forming. And we'll probably see some art and literature from that, but that's not the question. I think it's not only like anger and hurt or being, insulted by the fact that someone would want to leave this deadly paradise. But also, I think Israelis are very, very concerned with the internal situation back home, back in Israel. And this situation will only be resolved by liberal powers if we don't have enough liberals in Israel by the time this conflict will be resolved, if we ever come to this climax. I think a lot of Israelis are very concerned that Israel is not gonna, make it. And this is another layer, I think, that the Yordim are, I hate this term, okay? But people who are living Israel at the moment are very highly educated, liberals, left-wing.
Now, and one last thing that I think, we're talking about rational, answers, like the threat, the demographic change, the liberals versus non-liberal powers in Israel. But I think there is a lot of unstated emotional baggage there. Questions of jealousy, who can and cannot leave, questions of privilege, hatred towards the elite that is kind of fueled by the government and the institution for years. So I'm just saying there's a lot of kind of spiraling affect underneath all of this rational conversation that is perhaps what is inflating this into anger and rage and violence, etc.
There's a book by Gadi Taub. I'm not sure how to say it in
I don't know the translation to
Mobile and unmobile?
Neyachim in Hebrew is someone who can move.
Static and dynamic?
Static and dynamic, yeah, okay. Gadi Taub is a writer and a thinker, and he's
not a liberal.
He used to be. I admired him at one point. I think he had a great cultural contribution. I admit that the way that he speaks now is very different than mine, and I think that he changed a lot, both in the ideas but also in the depth of what he's saying. But he has a book that talks about people who are static and people who have the ability to live, to move, as the new categorization of Israelis. You have the ones who are bound to Israel, they have no option to move, and you have the ones who are able to leave. And he says this is the real categorization of Israelis right now. You can disagree, I disagree, but it's such a core idea in the right-wing thought, in the right-wing ideas right now, because they see liberals moving out and they hate it.
Thank you. I have two questions. One is kind of about the emergence of Yiddish literature that was also very much in Berlin, and the younger grad students who are pursuing Yiddish very much see it as a language without a country. So I think there's parallels there. But my selfish question, because I've been commissioned to write an article on anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism in the art world for a national journal here. And I know my experiences were very different than yours in San Diego. And when I was in Israel, like for example, I saw the curator of the Venice Biennial Pavilion, not this one, the last one, who chose to close it, but when she was leaving Israel and I was meeting with her, there wasn't a plan to close it. So I'm just wondering about the, I mean, there's the obvious impact of this international boycott in the art world. I don't think there's any question that that's happening, and I know even like curators at the Israel Museum can't buy works because they're. So I'm just curious how. I mean, that's obviously impacting Israeli artists, and just how. What are people thinking or trying to do about it?
Yeah, make.
Should I answer?
I'm going to grab these questions, so another one, and then I will come back to you. And then we'll answer what we can answer in the time that remains. But questions, please keep them brief.
Okay. Okay, brevity is the soul of wit, said Shakespeare. But two comments. First of all, you can take the Israeli out of Israel, but you can't take Israel out of the Israeli. And the other preface is, Jews have done one of two things that have never, ever been done in the world, and that is to revive a dead language. Other people have tried to some of it, but that should be pointed out. It's never, ever been done in a successful way. My question is a very succinct and common one. 60 years ago, there used to be a book fair every year in Jerusalem, and they published more books in Hebrew than they did all over the Middle East. Is that gone?
Last question. Question, right? Yes.
When you talk about the Yardim, that accelerated 2 years ago, 3 years ago. It's a different world now. And what is there a trend to come back?
Can you ask again? I didn't get it.
Yeah, those who have left, who've gone to Europe, are finding increased, shocking anti-Semitism. That world has changed. Is that affecting the immigration pattern?
Go for it.
Go for it.
Yeah.
You want to start with the art scene? It's the easiest one. No, I'm joking.
The answer is we feel it very much. As you know, like the Art Forum letter came out when? It was even before ground invasion to Gaza. So it was just, Israel was genocidal while still people were missing in the dust, in the ashes of the kibbutzim. So I think my career changed entirely since. A lot of relations that I had, I was supposed to have a show in Germany. I was supposed to have a talk in Germany, like a separate one. And I had a grant given to me, but it was not followed up on. So I just received the money and they wanted me to, just take the money and get out of our lives. So generally, I was very impacted by this, and I know a lot of my friends were as well. And it's super depressing. This is becoming, on the one hand side, we have a very practical situation that Israeli art does not go outside anymore. Nobody cares about it. It's boycott. It's ignored. Ignored is even like on the nice situations. And it doesn't have opportunity to grow because if you don't bring art and you don't get art out, you're kind of more limited. And I think this kind of betrayal is something that artists felt the most because we felt like we were a part of the global art scene. Like this was our home. These were our relationships, people we loved. We also felt the same, another wave with the global left that abandoned us. So this was a kind of layered depression that we are still dealing with. And I think in my lifetime, I think my career is gonna remain with these limitations, sadly. The upside of that would be that we will have a lot to work on. So, yeah, but it's anti-Semitism, boycott, lack of opportunity. It all has different kind of appearances. It doesn't always have to be like someone in a kafia that screams from the river to the sea, right? So, yeah.
I want to add something from the literary scene. I don't want to name names, but there was a Hebrew a translator from Hebrew to English that published in an article in a literary magazine in the States shortly after October 7th. Do you remember it? Yeah? And it was the most left-wing article that you can write in Israel a few weeks after October 7th. It was a sentiment that even very left-wing people didn't feel at the time. It was very difficult to be compassionate and to have that emotion towards the other side at the time. And it was an article about love and about
solidarity.
And solidarity with the Palestinians and raising the voices of the Palestinians. It was all about that. And it also was a little bit about the Israeli experience after October 7th. It was a literary magazine, and the magazine published it, and there was such an outrage that they deleted the article, I think less than 24 hours after it was published, and the magazine closed. That's the effect that it had. And we covered it at our show. And I'm pro-Palestinian. I always say it. I think that being pro-Israeli means that you're pro-Palestinian and vice versa. The two coexist. It doesn't. If you're pro-Palestinian and you want Israel to cease to exist, you're not pro-Palestinian. You have no idea what you're talking about. The two are merged. It's the same cause for me. And I said it on my radio show, which caused me a lot of trouble. And we covered that topic, and I consider myself pro-Palestinian because I want them to have a good life, for me to have a good life. But if you reject that article, if that article causes such an outrage that the magazine closes, you don't want anything but our suicide. That's it. That's the only thing that Israeli can do. We cannot be left-wing enough. So the feeling that Dana talks about, we felt like we are Israelis, but we are also a part of a community of writers around the world, of liberals who are invested in a liberal way of thinking, who see a world that's becoming more and more nationalistic, forgetting the thing that we learned in the Second World War. Enough time passed and now we don't see it anymore. And we felt like we are part of the community, a global community that still fights the same power, right? And then we're thrown away, we're outcast, and now we're left. And the amazing thing is that when we meet Jewish liberal Americans, they feel the same way. We don't fit anywhere. I cannot be only Israeli because what Israeli represents right now is not what I want to represent. But I'm not a part of the global left, obviously. They call me a traitor in Israel because I'm too left-wing, and they call me a traitor outside of Israel because I'm not left-wing enough, right? So we are left with nothing. And I find that Jewish liberals in the States feel the same way. So that's it.
So if that's okay, it was a perfect place to end. And I want to thank you both for being here. It was really, really a treat for us to learn with you. And thank you, Yael, as always, for hosting.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you all for coming. Again, Rebecca, thank you so much for having us and for inviting us to beautiful Berkeley. Thank you so much.